Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Wexner Center for the Arts. My name is Emily Hayden, and I am the Curator of Academic and Public Programs here at the Wex. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for a panel conversation around the future of monuments, a collaboration with the Reimagining Columbus project. So we are so grateful to our partners and the Reimagining Columbus team for their partnership. I want to give a special thanks to our collaborators at the City of Columbus, including Aaron Blue, and those at Designing Local, Amanda Golden, Anna Tallarico, and Madeline Phillip. Thank you. We also want to thank our Learning and Public Program sponsors. Our events are made possible by American Electric Power Foundation, Cover My Meds, and Huntington. We also want to give a quick shout out to our members at the Wex, whose contributions make the Wex possible. Thank you. If you're interested in becoming a member, please speak to any Wex staff and we can help sign you up. So after tonight's event, we will send a thank you email, probably tomorrow. And there will be an opportunity for you to fill out a quick survey. Let us know what you think, what maybe worked really well, what we could work on about your program experience. This feedback really helps inform our programming. So please let us know how it went. As an incentive, we will give away 2 free film passes to an upcoming program for someone who responds to the survey. You do have to add your email at the end. So we hope to hear from you. Lastly, I do want to quickly note how our Q&A will work tonight. Our audience Q&A will be taking questions through our Wex hotline. So we have a number. I'm going to read it now a couple times, and then we'll have a slide at the end of the program that will also have that number. It's 614-813-3416. 614-813-3416. Like I mentioned, we'll have that on a slide as well, but we'll be taking questions through text and kind of moderating questions that way. Okay, I think I've covered my notes. I'll now turn it over to our partner, Anna Tallarico, Public Art Coordinator with Designing Local, to welcome our panelists.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you all for being here, and thank you to the Wex for being such a gracious host and partner for this event. As Emily said, my name is Anna Tallarico. I'm the Public Art Coordinator with Designing Local. We are a Columbus-based multidisciplinary planning firm and landscape architecture studio. We're delighted to welcome you tonight to the future of monuments. This panel will explore the collaboration between artists, communities, and city leadership as we collectively consider the future of monuments and new memorial practices. Tonight's panel has been organized as part of Reimagining Columbus, a city-led, community-driven project funded by the Mellon Foundation through their Monument Project, which is a multi-year commitment aimed at transforming the nation's commemorative landscape to ensure our collective histories are more accurately represented. To learn more about Reimagining Columbus and the project outcomes, please visit reimaginingcolumbus.com. Tonight, we will be hearing from a dynamic and passionate panel of artists working at the intersection of public art and monuments, and each brings a unique approach to this ever-evolving practice. Norman Lee co-founded Recite with Shane Albritton. They create dynamic, multi-layered works that exist somewhere between art, architecture, and landscape to explore themes of community, identity, and narrative in the context of public space. Lee is the son of immigrants and part of a family that has organized for civil rights and racial justice for 3 generations, and he sees his artwork as an expression of that legacy. Since becoming a finalist in the World Trade Center Site Memorial Competition, he has developed a unique approach to commemoration defined by a sensitivity to the transcendent and an open, inclusive vision of our society. Lee and Albritton are passionate about helping communities honor difficult histories and recover the voices of those who struggled for justice, freedom, and human dignity. Recite has worked on commemorative and memorial projects throughout the country and will complete the Light of Hope, Cincinnati's landmark memorial to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. later this year. We're also joined by Melissa Mongiat, who is the co-founder of Daily Tous les Jours, the award-winning Montreal-based studio that is leading an emergent field of practice combining interactive art, storytelling, performance, and urban design to reinvent living together in the 21st century. Founded in 2010 alongside, help me with Muna's name. Muna Andreas, thank you. The studio produces projects that encourage citizens to play an active role in the transformation of their cities, with the public spaces we share every day as the canvas. Mungiat holds a master's degree in creative practice for narrative environments from Central St. Martin's College of Art and Design at the University of the Arts in London, and a bachelor's degree in graphic design from the School of Design at the University of Quebec in Montreal. We are also joined by Sandy Williams IV, who is an interdisciplinary artist, filmmaker, and professor. Their practice studies the vernacular or language of time as it exists across cultural landscapes, personal experiences, and as a unit of measurement. Their approach to public art is sensitive to the contextual histories that inform a specific region and create space in the archive for disenfranchised memories. Williams is concerned with cultivating love and empathy, and they hope that their artwork can conjure moments of reflection, inspire a sense of communal catharsis, and open viewers up to the perspectives they might not have considered otherwise. Our panel is moderated by Kendall Henry, an artist and curator based in New York who has specialized in the field of public art for over 30 years. He illustrates that public art can be used as a tool for social engagement, civic pride, and economic development through the projects and programs he has initiated in the US and internationally. Henry currently oversees New York City's temporary and permanent art commissions as Assistant Commissioner of Public Art at the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs. He is also an adjunct professor at New York University's Steinhardt School of Culture, Education, and Human Development. Please join me in warmly welcoming these esteemed guests to the WEX and to Columbus.
Is it evening yet? Yeah. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Okay, this is going to be a participatory thing we're going to have here. So before we start, I just want to say a couple of words here. I'll give a quick presentation. I'm going to pass it on to my other panelists as an introduction as to what their practice is. But before we even start that, I have a couple of questions for you. How many artists are in the audience? Okay, we got a couple. How many artists have done public art before? Okay, same hands, yeah. Allied folks, architects, engineer types, okay, a couple of those as well. Arts administrators, okay, a lot of those. And government folks. Okay, got a good list there. So we'll be talking to you, and the language we use will be sort of geared to all of you. Question number 2. When you think of a monument, what do you think of? How many people see a pedestal? Okay. Bronze. A horse. Man on the horse. White man on the horse. Okay. So that's all good, kind of, but this conversation will be about the future of monuments, right? And so what does that look like, and what is that about, and what are we all here to talk about is that future. And so hopefully at the end of the presentations, you'll get a broader sense as to what that means and sort of what that looks like. And this is a safe space. I've sort of inaugurated it as such. And so anything that you say, anything that we say stays in the room. What happens at the WEX stays at the WEX. And so please ask anything that you want to ask and feel free to engage us in our conversations. So I'm going to start with this little presentation. And 2 days from today is the anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. Right, and so this, I think, a couple of us on the panel here have sort of dealt with that in different kinds of ways in terms of producing monuments and memorials. But I want to show you the actual very first monument to 9/11 in New York City, and it's this one. And you can't really see what it is on this slide, but I'll explain. A year after the event happened, this guy, John Lynn, and a group of his friends took it upon themselves to print out these tags and labeled it with the names and the locations of the people who were killed on that day, and laid them all out in the subway station on 14th Street. 14th Street was the closest you could get to the site right after it happened, and 14th Street is about 50 blocks away. And what's interesting about this is that this was placed next to a police station. This is actually illegal to put any kind of things on subway walls, but there was this shared agreement, this unspoken agreement that this needed to happen, right? And so it's still up there now, many years later, and it's not in good shape, but it marks something that was important to happen when the city wasn't sort of making things happen. And so this was the very first monument to the 9/11 attacks in New York City, and it's still there. There's always been a history of who is represented, right? And I was fortunate enough to be around this project when I was a teenager in the 90s to talk about, and this is a project that happened in the South Bronx by an artist named John Ahern. And he created this piece where he, on a pedestal, when we think of monuments, we think of pedestals, of these three individuals that were from that community. And we'll be talking about community later. And they were, made of painted bronze. Raymond and Corey, Delisha, and I forgot the other gentleman's name, but the piece lasted for about 3 days. After it was installed, there was an uproar, and it was removed because people didn't feel that these were the people that needed to be represented, that these weren't the people that should have be elevated in that way, to be remembered or to sort of represent anything. To make sure it never comes back, the pedestals for trees were planted in front of them, and the flagpoles were placed on top. So it was such a sort of a drastic idea that once it was removed, it was never to be returned. I'm going to have a secret for you right now. We are putting them back, hopefully, in the next couple of years in that space because things have changed in the way we think about who is represented. Now, in doing so, there's a lot of response from the press, from people in understanding this idea of the man in the white man on the horse on the pedestal isn't the only way to see who should be memorialized, and there's a bit of backlash from that as well. So one of the things that we've been trying to do is sort of like, what does it look like for the underrepresented to create work that shows who needs to be represented? I'm going to show you a couple of these slides. This is the Roberto Clemente Memorial in the South Bronx, and this is by Melissa Calderon. And we all know who Roberto Clemente was. He's a sort of a baseball player, and he's known for that, but he was also a humanitarian. And so this young artist wanted to show his humanitarian aspects by creating this abuelo chair. And sort of when you sit in it, you sort of represent what he represented as an individual. So not just a baseball player, but he was more than that. And so this little memorial represented that. Then we have things like this by an artist, Hank Willis Thomas, who created a memorial that represents the African American in Brooklyn. And this is right off the Brooklyn Bridge on the Brooklyn side. And if you've been to New York City, you cross the Brooklyn Bridge, one of the things you see in the distance is the Statue of Liberty. And he used the same gesture of the Statue of Liberty to sort of create this monument from the arm of an immigrant that he knew. Of course, interpretation is something that we talk about when we talk about memorialization. And so in the middle is sort of what certain people interpreted as an ISIS symbol when it was installed just around Veterans Day. But this memorial became much more. And again, as memorials happen, they change meaning, they change interpretation. And the furthest to the right, it became a new symbol around the George Floyd murder and the protests. And so now this had a whole new meaning in terms of what the memorial meant, from it being just a symbol of the African-American male to a symbol of ISIS to a symbol of protest and resistance in the span of a couple of years. So the future of monuments. These are some images of a monument by an artist, Vanessa German, who was creating an artwork for the Shirley Chisholm Recreation Center in Brooklyn. And not wanting to do a monument to Shirley Chisholm, she wanted to sort of echo the inspiration that Shirley provided to her constituents and her members of her culture and her background that follow her same background. So she had conversations. Vanessa moved into this community. She's a Pittsburgh artist, moved into Brooklyn for a series of months to work with the community to identify individuals that needed to be recognized, and created these sort of beaded busts of them, and each of them became not just themselves, but an archetype for members of the community. Again, this is a different kind of memorial. Then we have things like this where Shalene Rodriguez wanted to sort of harken back to the South Bronx when the Bronx fires were happening, when by creating this building with a Jacob's ladder that is boarded up and sort of harkens again back to a time when this community was forgotten. And then we have a project like this with Kenseth Armstead, which is a project that's titled In Pursuit of Freedom, Every Negro is a Star, really talking about the abolitionist movement in Brooklyn. And he created this piece where, and again, all these pieces are in fabrication right now, so I'm giving you an early view of these things, where you're meant to sort of be underneath the night sky, the same night sky that the enslaved followed when they were traversing the Underground Railroad, and so sort of give you that experience. And lastly, our Shirley Chisholm Monument as part of an initiative we call She Built NYC, where Shirley with Olalekan Jafus and Amanda Williams, a team that came together to create the Shirley Chisholm Monument at the base of Prospect Park in Brooklyn, again, the same area where Shirley was assembly member, and to give you a sense of what that looks like. So this is, again, the beginning of getting your mind out of the man on a horse pedestal kind of idea of what a monument is, to begin to talk about what a monument could be and the future of the monument. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague to talk about his projects.
Thank you so much. Our studio, Recite, is based in Houston, and our studio focuses primarily on work in the public sphere. The other co-principal is Shane Alberton. And the type of work we do is what we call narrative placemaking. That's a word that we've used. It's like a version of the kind of site-specific work that we do, and in the four categories you see below are generally the major themes that we focus on, both in our memorial and commemoratives, but also in kind of a larger public art program that's commemoration, celebrating cultural diversity, connecting past and present, and celebrating community identity. The work that we do specifically is making connections. So as I mentioned, these could be connecting past and present, but it could be taking things like geographical conditions, architecture that's been abandoned, or objects related to a site, and we take those and imbue them and connect them with other ideas and kind of broaden the symbolic meaning of things that may be technical or utilitarian, and we kind of make it, give it a sculptural context. And you'll see as I move through these slides fairly quickly, this idea of making connections, particularly in this discussion of memorials and commemoratives. This project is called From Absence to Presence, and this is located on the campus of St. Mary's College in Southern Maryland. This project started when they were building a sports stadium, and they did the requisite archaeological survey, and they found evidence of artifacts, not remains, but like buttons and pot shards and bricks and foundations, and the leadership at the museum at the university wanted to commemorate this. So we took inspiration from the slave quarters that were on site, that was determined through the work of the archaeologists to determine the size of them, and also to look at the documents, runaway slave ads, kind of slave documents related to the families that owned these slaves, and combine them into essentially a materialized slave quarters using the language of erasure poetry taken from those documents. And you can kind of see in this image that we incorporated reflection that reflects the surrounding sports field as part of the work, not just something you look at, but something that reflects the entire surroundings. And here you see the image that we showed in some earlier presentations where we kind of show these motifs coming together, the motif of the slave quarters and the erasure poetry, and the erasure poetry kind of lend itself well to this idea of kind of clapboards or a materialization of clapboards. We collaborate in a lot of our works, particularly works that deal with histories, site-specific histories. And Quentin Baker was a poet that a poet and artist that is based out of Seattle that does a lot of erasure poetry. And for those of you, I'm sure many of you know what that is, but it's essentially taking a document and redacting portions of it to invert the meaning of the document. One of the most famous pieces is done by Tracy K. Smith, a U.S. poet laureate, where she took the Declaration of Independence and kind of redacted it and made it through the lens of the African experience. These are some of the articles or some of the archives that we found, this runaway slave ad, and we went through about 250 to 350 to create this work. This image shows the reflective quality. It was important that this piece wasn't going to be put away in some quiet corner of the university. We wanted it right there where all the action was happening at the university. So students play games, they have festivals. So this is actually confronting, taking something that is a difficult history and confronting day-to-day life with it. As part of the redaction, there are names that were called out, so it kind of functions almost like a memorial where you see names and people that the viewers come and see themselves reflect in it, to kind of conflating past and present, and also the surrounding space. And this is at night. It could change its quality. It becomes a beacon, taking these names and words and projecting it onto the field itself, the actual former plantation field. And, as Kendall mentioned, this idea of having works take on a life of its own, and kind of, a particular piece by, the piece, the Hank Willis Thomas piece, how it became, it had new meaning after George Floyd. So this was a couple of years after the piece where descendants of slave families in Maryland chose this as a pilgrimage site to have a family reunion of sorts. And we didn't even know about this. This was covered in the New Washington Post. They just kind of it emerged, like kind of they organically just emerged, and the leadership of the university helped them. This might be an annual event now, but that was something that was really surprising, that that this piece that we had a certain kind of scope for expanded into something much greater. This is a piece that we work with Amanda, Josh, and Anna on designing local. This is a MLK memorial called Pillars of Hope and Justice in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and this piece celebrates a speech that King gave prior to his "I Have a Dream" speech in D.C. The mandate for us was to use words from his speech as part of his design. So we really kind of looked at this idea of going back to Dr. King's, what radicalized him in civil rights was this kind of principles of nonviolence, or often called pillars of nonviolence. So we use this motif of pillars, these kind of classical forms that emerge from the ground, and they kind of spread out, and this idea of, and then that's something I didn't know, that where pillars are actually based on, or the fluted pillars from classical architecture is actually based on ancient Egyptian architecture, which is based on bundles of papyrus. And of course, papyruses have this kind of metaphor of bending without breaking. So this idea of strength through nonviolence was something that was key. And we also, here you see the picture on the left of him actually giving the speech at the auditorium. And also we drew upon the site-specific narrative of Fort Wayne being an agricultural community, and corn, and how that things kind of grow. So this idea of him speaking these words and it taking root in the ground and the kind of sprouting up, and taking life of its own, was the metaphor that we connect together in this particular piece. This is a piece you see it at night, illuminated. It has this kind of porous quality that you can kind of see through it. And the idea is it casts shadows during the day. You're meant to kind of circulate through them and read the text. This is the dedication, where Martin Luther King's son, MLK III, was able to be part of the dedication, and other leaders that work with Dr. King in Fort Wayne. And he came up to me after the dedication and said, there are not many memorials kind of deal with those principles of nonviolence. And he goes, this is exactly what my dad would have wanted. Of course, that was something that was very touching for him to say. This piece is in Norfolk, Virginia, and this was commission. We won this commission with the mandate of commemorating the end of segregation in Norfolk. And for this, we connected this idea of school walls as being something that can divide and exclude students, but also provide a space for a safe place to learn. And we like that duality. So we really use that as the motif. So something that's purely utilitarian, as we know, school. And this is taken from like the mid-century school design. You can see from the bricks and the signage on it that, they're very utilitarian, very functional, but we kind of gave this new sculptural meaning. And this piece forms a dematerialization to reveal a story of these students. And this is the Norfolk 17, these students that were really heroes that no one knew about, this is why we did the piece, to really get the story out, to tell the story of these brave students that helped to end segregation. As I mentioned, these are part of the proposal. These are like a lot of the boards we show prior to the final design. So you see the mid-century design motif and this idea of bricks that are changing to glass as this kind of dematerialization gesture. There's a close-up of the sign. Here you see coming from the other angle. This is also meant to provide didactic information. So there's a time, each brick has a timeline kind of showing you the course of that. And at the end, we see a poem done by the great Tim Siebels, who is the twice poet laureate of the state of Virginia. And he wrote this poem called 17 Ways, which was a very powerful part and just a really important part of the piece. This last project I wanted to show you is what we completed last year. This is a lynching memorial called Shadow Lines in the heart of Dallas. This is about 2 minutes walk from Dealey Plaza, where JFK was assassinated. And it's a sundial. It basically takes the motif of the sundial, but instead of marking hours of the day, it marks the anniversary dates when individuals were lynched on this site. The activists we work with, part of a group named Remembering Black Dallas, his mandate was this really powerful quote. He was, this memorial will be a reverent reminder that lynchings happen on the ground you walk on every day. So the images you show here, which is particularly potent, shows the hanging of Alan Brooks and back then, and also kind of what it looks like now. Dallas has transformed quite a bit, as many cities are. They actually changed a lot of even the direction of the Trinity River that runs through it. And we were thinking as artists, infrastructure changes, landscape changes, but the sun is consistent. So the shadows of the sun, direction of the sun will be there. As long as the sun is shining, as long as, the sun exists, this will always be the constant. So we really took advantage of that and created this kind of quartz piece with a gnomon, and the shadows are almost like cutting into the quartz steel. So we kind of weaponize this idea of the shadow. And that also harkens back to this notion of sundown towns, which were towns in this all over the U.S. actually that didn't allow Black people to be out after sunset. And if you were found after sunset, you might get beat up, be put in jail, a myriad of things, really bad things. So this idea of weaponizing darkness or weaponizing the lack of sun was something that also factored into this piece. You see people kind of leaving little mementos there, so very much in the spirit of how people use memorials and monuments. And once again, Tim Siebels wrote a very powerful poem that was inscribed onto this wall. And here you see the names inscribed on the wall. And this is the last image. It shows exactly, that's not a rendering, that shows you exactly where the piece is. So for all of you that know, that's been to Dallas or familiar with it, that is the Reunion Tower back there, which is the I don't really like the look of that monument. I think it's kind of ugly, but it is the landmark of Dallas, and it literally is in the heart of the city. So when we gave the presentation, that this is a reverent reminder, literally in the heart of the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Norman. I feel like I need to take a breath.
Me too.
This. Whoa. Okay. Hi, everyone. Well, I'm the co-founder of Daily Tous les Jours. We come from the fields of art and design, a bit of cinema, storytelling a lot, working in public space kind of by fortune. being passionate about participatory practices, going where the audience is that never buys a ticket, that includes everyone that you can't think of. We, project by project, started building a practice. With Muna Andreas, we are based in Montreal, and fascinated by performance, storytelling, and also interactive arts. And I would like to propose our conversation today to see monuments as infrastructure for the human spirit. It was through a conversation with someone during the pandemic who was interviewing us, and we were checking in on each other, and he said, well, what you're really doing right now, because we were not allowed to go in public space, it's like and public spaces were devoid of humans, and how cities were not cities without humans, and how we needed each other, and we needed more than just pure functionalities of the city, but a space to be what we can, all that we can encompass and do. Taking you, it's been 15 years of our practice, taking you to some early projects that really formed our practice today. We were offered on year one to work with the entertainment district in Montreal, and we were actually given the back of the district, the back of the opera house, but the front of a science pavilion. And for the inauguration, they wanted us to take over the space and do something to honor the future of this place. And so we worked with a musician, but also with a biologist at the time who was studying cooperation amongst animals, and came to us and said that we kind of do the same thing. We put probes in the environment and look how they change behaviors between people. And so we decided to hang 21 swings on these structures that were already existing there. And the higher the swing, the higher the note. And when people would swing in synchronicity, secret melodies would emerge. So all of this very much planned in a scientific way with our wonderful multidisciplinary group. And it was a great success. It felt so good. People would swing there for hours saying how great it is to make music with your entire body. And we had a chance to do a touring version that traveled a little bit everywhere. And slowly in watching people interact and playing with this, we started to also find out about, how swings have been used throughout the histories and cultures as a therapeutic tool. And also in interviewing people and asking them to find a word to describe their experience, therapeutic was one of the top words that was used. And looking at science and neuroscience, there's something about also the act of creating music together that is more powerful in all those happy hormones that can be released, and also in that sense of social connection between people. More than if you listen to music alone, or even if you play music alone. When we play music together, or dance, or sing, collective performance has that special effect. And we started to understand what we did very intuitively, how it could become, why it was so powerful and effective with people. And so we now have permanent versions. This is at the North Carolina Museum of Art with our Daydreamer benches just in front. And we started doing custom versions. This one is going in Tasmania, slightly crazy. And some, here maybe you feel more the therapeutic element is in Germany. And it's this one was hung from existing architecture for a museum. And from the swing, we started to, well, we had a very context-based approach. We kind of tried to see what we could learn from there and see how we could bring that sort of experience, but how could we reinvent other parts of the cities, like the public bench. And this is a rocking bench that spins and releases choir voices. And when people rock in synchronicity, more complex melodies emerge, as we learned from the swings, how magical the moments this created. Oops. And then seeing also other types of infrastructure like pavements, how we can change the way people walk and maybe dance in public space if they were to make music as you step on tiles, or play with people's shadows. Sorry, my clicker. In places like one of the first musical pavements that played with shadows was in Arizona, where our relationship with the sun is quite a hostile one, and we wanted to redefine that, rekindle that relationship a little bit for a brief moment. And seeing how walking can become dancing, and how easy it can be to access those types of experiences. That you just walk or roll into a space and the magic comes to you. or how we can make people move. This is in Charlotte. Balancing Act is the name of the piece because it makes you work on your balance together or alone and release and play this weird synthesizer instrument. Or sing, because singing is forever. This was done the same year as the swing. It's a field of microphones that invites you to sing your heart out with a little bit of autotune. Keeping it nice for everyone. I wanted to show you this project if we're talking about monuments, because it's in a train station in St. Paul, Union Depot, a historical building. We were part of they had gone through so much trouble restoring it the way it was. And we won this competition with Northern Lights, with Steve Dietz. Jim Campbell was also one of the presenting work with us. He was hanging something on the ceiling, and we were working more on the ground level. And we were fascinated by, at the time, the beginnings for us of AI. It was in 2014. And such a historic building, all the stories it was holding, but also the future ahead, and seeing how we can open this up and bring this into a conversation. So we created this amateur intelligence radio, so radio furniture, that different pieces for different parts of the station that would be connected to the weather, the train schedule, also historical facts from the building. And the building was the voice of that radio. But people could also send in content for the radio to talk. There were birthday programs, apology letters, or advice for rainy days, trying to make the most of that time in a train station where most of people are waiting. And it's just this wonderful opportunity to bring conversation and make the space a little bit more personable and reveal both past, present, and future stories. And our favorite station was that in exploring where we could have those radio furniture, the radio wall that was hidden behind that door that just led to nowhere. They had to keep it as part of the restoration, but it was no longer taking you to the docks. So we thought it was a perfect place for a radio wall. But sometimes it's also nice to go beyond stories and words and just have people be present with one another. And these pieces, this series transforms voice into music. So here you have two microphones, and as people start speaking into them, their voices transformed into music that travels in color along that very long thread. I can tell you that we were inspired by that scene from The Lady and the Tramp and the Spaghetti Bowl. But this was actually done before, where here you have 3 microphones to jam right out in public space and create this archway that takes you to a new neighborhood. So for us, it was a new way to say hello. And I'm taking you back in time because the original Hello series was for the trees, where it was a series of arches for Brown's Promenade in Houston. In Houston, Norman, and you would send in messages at both ends of the promenade, and you'd watch your message be slowly transformed and also slow down your pace. And it was really just about making you slow down and look up. And more, we're fascinated by all these other people that are not people, but that are living and that we're sharing space with. So we are currently working a lot in forests and seeing how this changes the way we work in encompassing a more changing environments and how our human spirit can be transformed. Stay tuned. We're working on a voice composting system and some human perches, like for birds, but for humans. This will be fun. And in the meantime, you can buy our book. We've worked a lot on it, and it has more of these stories in it.
I'm Sandy Williams IV. I'm coming from Richmond, Virginia, where I'm a professor of sculpture, as well as a public artist. So my first kind of entry into the public art world was these wax monuments that I started making in 2017. I had just moved to Richmond, and it was part of really big conversations that were happening there around what to do with the monuments, how we as a community got to inform those decisions, and what the futures were, as we're talking about tonight. And in being part of those conversations, I think it became quickly apparent, specifically in Richmond, how little agency we had as a community to influence these conversations. So this was kind of my anti-monument in a way. Was, I was like, a monument is monumental in size. It's typically permanent in its materials and singular in its form so that it holds a sort of reverence. So to flip that, I made them miniature, made them wax, and made them multiples, and started distributing them. So since then, I've distributed thousands of these now around the world. And it was a way to give people agency over that form. You know, at the time in 2017, you couldn't. I had friends arrested in front of the far right one, the Lee, just for doing a performance in front of it. So it was a way to give people some sort of agency over these forms and make a sort of personal monument. This is an installation of that work at Grounds for Sculpture in New Jersey. This was kind of the first public wax monument I had the opportunity to make in Queens, New York at Socrates Sculpture Park. So it's about 3,000 pounds of wax, 6 feet tall by 11 feet wide, that I cast on a shoestring budget and just like with little turkey fryers melting the wax every day. And I say that to say like these works for me are kind of this labor of love that I spend a lot of time producing, and then I put them out into the public and they're part of the community, you know? So it was this opportunity for us to sort of practice this public democracy where we all got to come and decide what that space should look like and what that form should look like. And by the time, you know, it was a 6-month installation, by the time I came back to it, it was just a pile of wax that the kids in the neighborhood had created a trading system around. And other artists were finding wax buried in their sculptures, and that's the beauty of that material for me too. Is I think it is symbolic or a metaphor for this kind of public power, where I think so often in these conversations around the country, there's this idea that, you know, it's erasing history if we remove a monument or replace it with something else. And for me, I think that material kind of holds this metaphor for how that space will always have power. You know, you melt that thing down, you still have that material. We can recast it, we can reshape it into something that reflects what we want to have in that space now. And so I think that community space is so powerful, and the resources and materials that we have are always there and kind of available if we're so brave to reshape them. This was again, within the same series, a 6-foot wax Lincoln that we did in DC at an elementary school. I don't have time to really talk about the craziness of this project, but it melted. Like our climate is warming, and this wax I've been using since 2020 to cast these public projects was no longer capable of handling the climate. And so the Lincoln ended up melting in the heat wave. It like went viral, and like all around the world, people were kind of like writing about the symbol and what that meant and the powers of it. And I think, again, that sort of speaks to the way that time changes the context around these works and changes the message. And I think, again, whenever I'm making these works in particular, I'm like, you know, I'm not a cop. You know, I'm not there to police the meaning of the work even. And so I think that is something that really excites me about public art. In contrast to maybe some of the studio work that I do, is that I'm constantly shaping the meaning with the community, and it does kind of become this democratic process, for better or for worse, when you're working with a community to make a public work. Like, it really does take on a life well outside of kind of my personal expectations for the piece. This is the first, I've also been doing these skywriting works. This was the second skywriting I did. This was in Brooklyn, New York, part of this series of works I've been doing called the 40 Acres Archive, that is identifying, highlighting, and celebrating spaces of Black history in different communities around the country, mostly along the East Coast as far as I've done them. So Weeksville is remembered as one of the first recognized free Black communities in the country. We're talking like 1830. Black people are given the right to own property in New York, and they start doing that. So Weeksville, you know, existed around the 1930s. They say it starts to disappear and is sort of rediscovered in the 60s. And so to hold that memory and celebrate it, we had this skywriting on Juneteenth in 2023 So I hired a skywriter to trace the dimensions of that former neighborhood in the sky above where it used to be. We made a film kind of documenting that process, along with a food and music festival that we did in collaboration with the Weeksville Heritage Center that exists there now. And then this was shown at the Shed in New York City. So the film showed, along with documentation of that project and archival material. This is a memorial I was commissioned for at Roanoke College in Roanoke, Virginia, Salem, Roanoke, Virginia, to commemorate their history of enslaved labor. So for that project, I was given about almost 1,000 names of people who were enslaved at the college that they wanted to commemorate. And so this project is called Authors and Architects. It is about 1,000 bronze books, each of which has the name or identification of someone who was enslaved at the college. Families that we could find are listed together. A lot of times it just said boy or girl or slave, and so oftentimes it'll note that by saying name unrecorded. The books are closed, of course, because they're bronze, but also to think about the fact that these are stories that we just found in the margins. You know, they're stories that weren't remembered or honored in the ways that they should have been. And so it's a constant process of sort of, when doing this work, working with an absence and sort of trying to figure out how to memorialize that absence. The last series I'll talk about is these time rulers I've been making that measure the length of a second at 1 mile per hour. So each bar holds the space of 1 second, if you will, if you believe me for the purpose of this presentation. And then I'm using that modularly to tell different times or hold specific durations. So this is 10 time rulers. Eric Gardner was murdered in New York by NYPD. He was held in an illegal chokehold for 10 seconds. And so thinking about the weight of that time and how it has carried over time, you know, that was in 2014, and we've seen it, that same story kind of recur. And it holds in our spaces, you know, that violence continues to exist invisibly. So the project is kind of to think about making space for that invisible weight. This was 15 time rulers. It's said that it takes about 15 seconds to say the U.S. Pledge of Allegiance. So it's 15 wax rulers on the wall. You know, you could think about wax versus bronze, the lightness, the malleability versus the weight of the other. So I'm working a lot with the way that material works symbolically as well. And these were shown together. And so it was significant as well to sort of think about, you know, his murder happened faster than you could say the Pledge of Allegiance, and how that those duration, you know, the fragility of that time too as well. And this is what I'm working on now, a commission in Alexandria, Virginia, that is to commemorate the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. So it's going to be, it takes about 10 minutes to read the Declaration of Independence, which I hadn't done since maybe grade school, if then even. But to read it again today was really striking. And I was like, you know, we should just encourage people to be reading that document, because you might find a lot of it sounds familiar. And so the pile, it's going to be a pile of about 600 of those rulers is kind of the project I'm working on now.
Wow, there's a lot going on here at this group. Yeah. So I wanted to start with the basics, right? In the presentation, in the conversation, we've been going back between monuments and memorials. How do you define those? What is a monument? What is a memorial?
I'll talk. They get confused a lot, and they use them interchangeably. So a lot of the projects that we show, they interchangeably call it a commemorative and memorial and monument. So honestly, I don't know there's really a good definition. It really depends, I guess, on a lot of kind of what the narrative that you're trying to say or that you're trying to convey. But it just from my years of work on it, there's still not a very clear, definitive response to that from my perspective. So good question.
Anybody else want to try that? Or maybe if I could ask a different kind of way. So what makes a monument a monument? What are some of the parts that needs to be there for it to be a monument? Even in your own practice.
I would say spontaneously how it resonates with people. I think you only hold a part of the monument when you're working on it.
Mm-hmm.
And people who live with it will make it what it is.
I think maybe if I had to put something on it, I think it's the way you invite people into the space maybe changes that distinction where traditionally, especially, I think a monument is kind of center in the space, whereas a memorial is more inviting and decentralizing in my kind of way of thinking about it. I think for me, when I'm calling something a monument versus a memorial, it's trying to define the invitation of how I'm inviting people into the space.
The piece in Cincinnati that there was actually some disagreement on there should be a memorial or monument, and the dialogue actually reached to the point where people were saying, "Well, it's memorializing MLK," but then a lot of what the piece we're doing in Cincinnati deals with a lot of local Cincinnati history, and a lot of the people that work with Dr. King are still alive. So there's this idea of kind of a celebration of his work. So they go, well, it should be a monument because this is an ongoing thing. We're not just remembering back, but we're also looking back, but also looking towards the future. So a lot of people think, well, I think a monument is more appropriate. But then like a commemorative, we've done like city anniversary projects where like the 100th anniversary or the bicentennial, and they call those commemoratives or monuments. So I think what the topic often dictates, and often the nature, the specific, are we memorializing something that's tragic or was it celebratory? That all factors into kind of how people define it, I think, in the nomenclature.
Okay, so I didn't know. I just wanted to ask y'all. So how do you start? Each of you has some fantastic projects. And so what is your process of starting? You get a call out or you get like a thought. And so how do you begin with any one of these projects? Is there some sort of thing that you do or think about or reach inward? How do you start?
Well, I think just kind of practically, most of our work comes through calls, like RFQs and RFPs. So a lot of the criteria is already set. And because we often think ourselves as conduits, that's kind of a defining word that we describe our process, that it's not our story that we're trying to tell. A lot of public artists that work in the public realm, whether they do public art or memorials or not, they tend to have this kind of inner calling, and they try to, at every chance they get, they try to kind of create that voice wherever they are. So that's their version of site specificity. Ours is really about kind of going in tabula rasa. We work with a myriad of materials, as you saw. So we're really kind of going as clear as possible, and then work with community, work with stakeholders, and then through that dialogue, it emerges. So that's how it starts for us. It's usually a call with parameters, and then discussion and dialogue is how we usually begin.
Before you answer, because all your projects look very different, right? So there's not is there like a common thread throughout all your memorial type of projects that is, if you look at the body of the work that you guys have done, can you point out that this is what they've always been doing?
Yes, I think connectivity. So I think the big, with a lot of our work is about the big overarching goal is connecting past and present, right? So we're often, either if it's natural history, historical history, we're taking that and making something meaningful for the current viewership. So then we kind of broadened that to kind of look at, and often when we approach a project where we start the dialogue, there's all these things that they want to accomplish, and not all of them, kind of seem related. They go, well, and often in the call they'll say, here are 10 themes, and you could focus on several of them or all of them, and often we try to go, let's look at all of them and not necessarily focus on them, but let's see how they all connect in a way that is synergistic, where it's not an additive project. We don't want to build a camel. It's all a bunch of parts. So we take all those themes and make the sum greater, the whole greater than the sum of its parts. So it's about like taking things like a school wall, or things that maybe people are thinking just totally utilitarian. It's just part of the technical scope of what the site is, and we use that and imbue that with the poetry and root out the sculpture. So I think this idea of connectivity, really what drives us. We think it is a huge challenge to often we come and it goes, well, if you can connect those ideas, I don't, a lot of people are very dubious that we can actually do that. But particularly with memorials and monuments, where you're dealing with a very sensitive topic, like we did a piece in Durham where we did a piece that had to create a healing gesture between the police department and the Black community. And the police department happens to be the most diverse police department in the country, from what I've heard. So obviously officers that are Black and brown that work for the force, they feel this tension from the community. So the piece we had to create was something that honored the police and their oath and all those things that you think of as important for police. And also it had to resonate with the community in a way where they didn't want to see like a badge or a shield or, these things. So when they went on the project, they say, hey, you're going to get a lot of pushback for whatever you do. So when we ended up, I should have put the piece up there, but when we did it, they were very happy. The public saw it. This piece, which was based on kind of textiles and kind of the process of heddle and loom, saw that as kind of like quilting and things that are very, very much related to the history of the site. And then the police, we took the form of the badge and stylized it where you could read it as a loom, as a kind of a weaving sculpture, but it also police officers, when they read our description, could see the shield. And also we took the oath of office and made it out of these kind of threads that are pulled through like a loom. So when you looked at it from afar, where the public would see it, it just looks like a beautiful pattern taken from a quilt. But then when you see it, you see the words. So.
Very diplomatic of you. Melissa, how do you start?
For the longest time, I think it became very natural that there was this recurrent pattern in our process where we talk to people. We had tried to understand people, site, and stories. And that was kind of our way of not thinking and just starting to work. And it's always interesting to see, who do you talk to? And who are the people who are going to collaborate on the story? And it's often, we love to involve people who you less think of involving, like kids that are often, they didn't create any of the past that you're talking about, but they will deal with the story as they grow up. And these lenses are always very rich. In some projects, whether it's working in a park that is in front of a high school, well, our work is very musical. If you haven't noticed, well, you couldn't hear it tonight, but it's beautiful music that people create without any knowledge of music. But in working with different collaborations from a site to another, when we go to Dubai, we work with musicians from the region. And for a school in Antioch, Tennessee, we worked with a marching band. And giving a voice, I think, is really empowering for us and for them. And it also creates these wonderful ambassadors. And there was this language. We had a chance to do an impact study with the Knight Foundation in 2016. And the word pride was never in our language before. And how important it is in what you do, that it's not so much like, again, what you create and how happy you are with the result, but the kind of pride that you can instill from the community around it, and often involving them in creating the story or being actually a part of the process, production or creation, is really rewarding.
Look at you, Sandy.
I think I'm similar, where it starts with the site, and then doing research into the histories that have collected in that space or around it, before then kind of engaging stakeholders and finding those community members that are going to steward the works afterwards, after you finish installing it there. And then it's really like the material realities of, okay, what's the budget? What's possible? What's the timeline for this project, that can work within kind of those complexities? So it's kind of collecting as much information as I can about the community and the space before starting to conceptualize like what form or material will make sense. And then it's a lot of back and forth between those stakeholders and myself.
And I was waiting for somebody to say community and stakeholders, and you sort of brought it up.
Many points.
2 points.
This was a test.
It was a test and you passed. So the thing is, a lot of these works, whether it be commemorative, monuments, memorial, it doesn't live, it's not coming from all of you alone. It's sort of this whole community that's involved. There's a lot of, if you arts administrators out there, you want to hear the community engagement component of what the artist is doing. And so I'm curious, first of all, what do you think of this community engagement thing? And how do you do community engagement? What does that look like for y'all?
It's all different for us. Sometimes we go when we don't have anything and it's a listening sessions. We just do a very unorganized, well, it's organized in the sense that, there's a space and everything, but where we just kind of have it be very organic and conversational like this. And other times where it's a little bit more of a, I guess, traditional kind of a short list protocol where you have finalists and you do proposals, and then that gets put in front of a community, and then you get feedback. So we've done that. We've done. It really depends, but kind of, I guess, an overarching philosophical notion, regardless of the mechanism or the format, is this idea that we live right now with stakeholders and community where there's so much fracturing of viewpoints, and politically we seem to be living in kind of parallel multiple universes, I guess. So this idea of disagreement and tension is very fraught, and so we often look at common denominators if there is difference. And in a lot of these listen sessions, we look for intersection points. So when a lot of the projects, the idea, we hear it and it sounds like everybody has a fear of something, so we identify kind of what those fears are in every group, and then we go, okay, we're going to work from that common caution or fear, worry, and then we start the dialogue there. So at least we're in the room and we're all gonna talk about that, and then those intersection points become the springboards for a work. And a lot of times, like once you identify that, and then a lot of stuff starts to emerge from those conversations. So I think we do a lot of different type of, community engagements, but I think that is kind of what we do. I think that's maybe, somewhat unique, but I think more and more people are kind of realizing that's how you bring people together. You kind of identify where do we agree on, and then we go from there.
I feel that often it feels like it's too much and not enough. Often wonder if the right people are at the table. You don't always have the control on who to invite. Last night we were talking with Dion. I don't know if she's here at the Wex, and it came quite apparent on, to really do this engagement, you need time. And she's worked 20 years at the Wex, engaging with young audiences, and it's you need that time to really build relationships. You can never really build satisfying relationships in that short time. I think in some cases where it's most successful, there's already a relationship with the institution or the city, with a group of people who are motivated, who know other people, and it's that ripple effect that you feel that you are in a system that can affect proper change. But it's not always the case. And sometimes it feels not necessarily fruitful or appropriate or productive.
I feel like for me, it's important in the start, even to like dissolve the sort of dichotomy that is like, I'm the artist and you're the community. Like I'm always like, I'm just a concerned citizen, doing I'm here with y'all, like we're doing this together. And I think that's just an important way of kind of framing the outcomes and the outlook of what the project wants to be. And then from there, I think it again looks all types of different ways. I'm also a professor, so I think like I'm engaging the community every week also in that way where it's like more educational. But that always, I think, feeds into the way I sort of think about my projects, and the learning outcomes are really the conversations that we're trying to spark. I think always with these public projects, it's about fostering a conversation that can be productive, and that is kind of inspired by the community and kind of what's at stake at the time.
But do you feel, any of you feel that it's your responsibility though, to manage that engagement? Or, most of what you've been doing has been initiated by a commissioning agency of some sort, or someone who wants to work with you, and you're left holding the ball. So do you feel that perhaps there's another way about finding this communities, who are the stakeholders, and making sure that there is time to sort of have that engagement? Or, if there's some folks out here who's like, well, we're looking for artists who does community engagement, it has to be this particular kind of way or not. What would you like them to understand, or in terms of distribution of responsibility?
I mean, I think we increasingly come with an experience of what that can look like in different communities. And I think in my process, that's part of the research stage as well, as sort of just like, okay, this is the topic. What organizations already exist in that city that already do this work? And then kind of coming to the commissioning body with, do y'all know people here, there? But yeah, I certainly don't think it's my sole responsibility, and typically rely on the commissioning body to kind of educate me as to what's going on in their community.
We try to have fun with the process. We find we destabilize a little bit people with different activities, but a lot of it is also who shows up. So yeah, it's always a little bit of a gamble.
I echo, the sentiments in that experience, and kind of what we found recently is just the reason we're having this conversation, because this is really like the Wild West of public art. It just so much is like new, particularly like right now with the kind of politically where we are. And what I found in the last couple of years, every project that we've done, even they may be, MLK projects, our experience working in Fort Wayne and Cincinnati was very, very different. Cincinnati was actually kind of challenging with the politics. But what we found is that every situation is completely different, and we're all learning at the same time. Like because it's so new, the topics are so new. We're talking about bringing down Confederate monuments and erecting things that kind of tell the truth, right? Well, that's just happening now. Like we just started in the last 5 years, really talking about that. So from that, there's all these issues. Like one of my colleagues, he was doing a project on an Underground Railroad up north, and he has an issue where he has a benefactor who is putting up the money, but then they also have these kind of an activist group, and they're at odds. So you have one person that has a vision that he's paying for, and other people that are part of the project are more, they're more scholarly. They actually know more about the subject, and they're at odds. Well, how do you resolve it? So a lot of times colleagues go, how do you handle it? And I go, well, I've not encountered that quite yet, but there's all these stories of like all these really, really unique obstacles. So from a experiential point of view, we can go in and go, oh, from my experience, I think this could be a minefield, maybe. And then we kind of tell people that, and they were like, and it's such a new thing, like they can't process it. So I don't think it can be our responsibility, because as artists, we're going into a community. We don't know. Just as we go do research and find things that can't be found on Wikipedia, the same thing. We don't understand the political dynamics of a community, and oftentimes the dynamics appear and emerge because of the project. So it's very different every single time.
You want to say something, Melissa?
I feel like you need art before the art.
Explain.
The most pressing thing, often we ask ourselves, why are we doing this? Is this the most important thing we can be doing for the world right now? The earth is burning, whether it's war or climate change. And we're so polarized. It is so frightening to see people, not being even able to have a productive conversation on things, on where to go, and how non-solidary, can you say that in English? Solidaire, how we need solidarity for what's ahead, and it doesn't feel like it's there. And often we need to be more present together out in public space, face to face, in the flesh, looking at, having conversations with people we don't necessarily agree with the algorithms when we are in the machines, but outside, we're all dealing with the same, with similar things, kids or aging parents, and we have more in common than we think. And often it's to get people out, and art does that. It can get you out to spend time in public space, not just go from A to B on looking at your phone, but looking at the world around you and talking to other. And sometimes I wish that there was more of that, because in smaller groups and in communities where people are already tight-knit, I felt it produced better art than in other cases.
I was going to kind of run in that same direction of, I think often there's this idea too that like the artwork is there to solve the problem or something, when it's really just a continuation of the conversation. And I think that's, if you're lucky, your community is active enough to where that's just a milestone in a continuing conversation. Because it's really hard. And I think you were saying like who shows up, and it's also who has time. There's such a politic to who has time to come to a talk on a Tuesday, and so like making space for that conversation to keep rolling, I think is like such a big part of it too.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And, we're thinking about talking about the future of monuments. And so does that mean we have to rethink what a monument needs to be in terms of longevity? I mean, so like permanence versus temporary. And I know Sandy and Melissa, you do a lot of temporary kind of works as part of your repertoire. And so could we talk about that a little bit? So is there something that's lost or gained if it's temporary versus permanent? And Norman, you could pipe in there if you have something to say, right?
Well, yeah, go ahead. Well, as most of our works are not temporary, as you mentioned, it is mostly permanent. I think the kind of the fundamental kind of difference. I was just thinking about your introduction of showing the images of kind of the horse and I don't know who said this, but it was kind of eloquently crystallized in my head when they say, well, memorials they're kind of shifted from verticality to horizontality, and ever since like the 1980s in Maya Lin, and kind of did the sea change and kind of creating something that was like in the earth, and even using the vocabulary of land art, as part of the narrative. So what we've done in our work is a lot of landscape type stuff, and there is not necessarily temporary, but there's an ephemerality to like vegetation. We work very closely with landscape architects in our work. So the idea of the sun, direction of the sun, different blooms that happen, how people might wear down a landscape over time. So we kind of, it really relies on that kind of ephemerality, and we've actually moved to this idea of kind of, you have a white man on a horse monument where you just kind of go up to it and walk around it. Well, that's the extent of the experience, but the horizontal experience allows you to take paths through it, and the importance of a kind of proprioceptive element of the memorial or commemorative experience, where if you go low and go high, or you have to go underneath some kind of a structure, or there's these kind of cadence moments where you have areas of openness and areas of more intimacy and a sense of discovery too. So as you move through, you discover things along a more horizontal experience, and things there's an interactive component. People leave things and can write things, so there's this kind of an organic emergent quality to the piece. So I guess in that sense, it kind of touched partially on your question of the things that may not be there, for sure play a part in our design or expectations, but not so much in their absence. It's more of a change, a constant, continual change or perpetual change.
I want to ask you a question.
Oh.
Because of the duration of a monument, I'm asking, what would Sandy think? How long does it take for a point of view? How long is a point of view? Or how long is it for a history to repeat itself? What would be that duration?
You're called out, Sandy.
I don't know how to answer either of those questions. I'm like trying to understand the question. What?
No, because things change. I see there's environmental questions. Do we need even buildings to, our perspective of permanence is changing, but also the stories as we unearth more and more.
Okay, I'm with you.
Difficult stories from the
I
past.
get it for sure. I love both for these reasons. Like, I think when a work is there for a while, it allows time for that thing to mature and kind of it to become part of the space. And I think like it to become home in a way. And then I've seen it too, where it's been there for too long, and it's stagnant in this way that no longer reflects the community. But then with the skywritings, which are kind of hyper temporal, that's a 10-minute moment. I think it's complicated for one because like the internet makes things kind of forever, and so I do have a lot of documentation from it that lets it live and travel. But at the same time, there was something about being there that became so important because it was so fast that like the people, like it was like watching an eclipse where the people that are like, you just remember that moment so well. And I think it really did this thing. The first one I did was in Richmond, Virginia, and people all the time come to me and talk about that piece and talk about the history there of the freedmen community that was there that we were commemorating. And like later, 2 years later, we put a permanent land acknowledgement to also hold that story. But I think that project being so ephemeral and so about being there and about being in that community and people knowing that it was going to be only 10 minutes, so people showed up for it. Because it's also 10, it's 10 minutes in your day. It was easy to. So I think they hold a different energy, and I think while the longer duration kind of gets to mature, I think there was something really powerful about the really short ones too.
This does make me think that often the temporary projects allow us to be a little bit more experimental, and they mark people in a different way. At first, we thought the musical swings would work better as seasonal or temporary things, and we still receive to this day emails every week about people telling us about their memory they had with the swings. And sometimes it's a wedding proposal or a lot of people who've lost loved ones and they remember their happy time on the swings. And yeah, when I was saying how the piece resonates with people, that stays with me. And at the same time, when it's permanent, it becomes like this, maybe more infrastructure. But when they were installed in Lawrence for the first time, our permanent musical swings, people would come and say, oh, I come here when I feel sad. I come here with my family. You're building rituals. You're building places that maybe the city doesn't necessarily offer that kind of support. And it's a different dynamic, but there is something in the temporal that can be quite effective in shaking a memory.
Something else that you brought up. Let me just check time. What? Okay, we have one more question already. Okay, so I'm going to not ask the question I wanted to ask you and ask another question I want to hear from you about. In all the projects that you do, each of you, how do you gauge success? As you're thinking,
If you show up on time.
as you're thinking, back in the day when we used to commission public artwork, if it was there the next day, we were lucky, we were successful, right? So that's how we gauged it back then. Time has changed. More money has been involved. How do you gauge success in the projects that you do?
That's a good question, for sure. I think a lot of like, let's use an example, kind of St. Mary's, like you see people communicate their personal experiences with the work. Like you said, you hear back. So we get that, and also administrators also get that feedback as well. And that goes a long, long way. When you have actual people that take time to write or to come to you or show up in these things and just said, I saw your work, from a while ago, and that really was important to me. And so all that is kind of emerges through time, these kind of personal, really kind of personal. But we've had situations where, a project that we worked on where they wanted some kind of a quantitative assessment. And I was like, well, I don't really know how so try to quantitate this, like it's that scene from Dead Poet Society where, teacher has like, what's a good poem? And you have like this, he draws the graph, and then he rips that, the teacher rips that page out of the book. I mean, it's like kind of like that issue, like how do you gauge the success of art? And also, something that's unpopular, as we know, Vietnam Veterans Memorial, the first couple of years may change completely in terms of how it's embraced, though. So there's a time element to the success. You as an artist, we'll just wait a few years, and maybe we'll have a totally different reception.
Okay, on a personal level now, I'm not trying to.
Oh,
yeah.
It was through the feedback. Yeah, through the feedback from people that we hear. I mean, that's kind of what drives us and what warms our heart and lets us know that we've, I guess, hit the nail on the head in terms of kind of what we were trying to do.
Good.
Who interacts, seeing the diversity of people that you can connect and make them see them behave in ways that you don't normally see people behave is incredibly satisfying. When people lose inhibitions, when they feel safe to be silly, that's really, really satisfying. We are looking into social value a lot these days. It's just this fascination when in Quebec you can prescribe a visit to the museum to fight depression. We were talking about prescribing art. But there are, loneliness epidemics that are having some real impact on the body and our social fabric, and seeing how providing these kinds of experiences, whether it's catharsis or this play, how it can make our society a little bit better. And I don't know, even maybe play in the economy of how we live.
We need a lot of that. Sandy.
Yeah, I feel like going third, I continue to echo my colleagues, but I think it's the way it's received into the community. I think a lot of times in my gallery world, I have an opening and afterwards I'm like, why did we do that? Like there's a kind of anticlimax to it sometimes that really is like, sometimes we call it like a postpartum for the exhibition where you're just like, I did all this work to carry it up to New York, and then we had this show, and I don't know. But I rarely feel that with my public projects. I think like the way that the community shows up and just like, it's just this energy. It's really fulfilling for me. Kind of like my classrooms too. But I think the most recent unveiling of the authors and architects, it was like such a huge community came out for it, and people were crying, and it was just like such an important moment for a lot of different people across the community. And I think that it was really like, this is why we're doing this, is kind of to give people, to have that moment with people, I think is what feels successful.
And I guess what you said about if the piece is there the next day, it's a success. I would expand that. It just made me think of like, so out of all the work we do, commemorators and memorials is kind of where we started and kind of what I hold most dear and what I'm most passionate about. Public art that is memorial or commemorative in a community tends to like really last a long time and grows with the community. But a lot of public art is like taken down in 20 years, and they actually will write in and say, well, this only has to stand up for 10 years or 20 years. And I'm like, well, I wanted to stand up as long as it can. So something successful when a community or a city wants to maintain it, wants to keep it pristine. So from even a governmental standpoint, a civic standpoint, like they want it there, and that's how you know successful. So I guess in terms of just actual, like, is it there in 20 years? Is it there in 50 years? It's a good indicator.
Yeah, I have to agree, because we installed some temporary artworks and had to remove it just to repair it. Uproar.
Yep.
Uproar. People were like, what? And it was incredible to see that they taking ownership of it, and the community was really there to support it and all that. So I think this is like question and answer time. So I hope you all have questions.
From you. Thanks, Kendall. Thank you all so much. And we've gotten a few questions kind of on this theme, so I'll ask it generally. A lot of people are hoping that you all can provide some context or shed some light on like how something gets commissioned. Who is deciding that an artwork is getting commissioned? What informs the criteria for that artwork? In other words, what are you all being directed to do as artists? What is your level of agency in those decisions versus I just have to follow the proposal and what's being requested of me? I know there's different experiences through all that, but kind of talk us through that.
Do you want to do that, Kendall?
I think we're kind of really at the, I won't say tail end, but after the stakeholders and art administrators know there's going to be a project, we're usually brought in after a lot of that's already the momentum started. So it's not us necessarily going, I'd love to do a memorial and such, and kind of go. I mean, although I've talked about possibly doing that, I have some kind of ideas, but it just takes a lot of, heavy lifting to just do that. And there's not necessarily a lack of projects that are out there that kind of deal with this kind of public memory. So we often respond to those calls.
So that's a very good question, person who asked it. There's about 500 different arts organizations throughout the United States that commission public art. And each of them have a different process by which what happens prior to the artist coming in to present or to submit a proposal for a commission. And I think the best situation in terms of who gets to make the decisions and sort of what that process is ones that allow the artist to do what the artist does best, and a panel that is diverse and is responsive to the community that the artwork is going to be placed in. And so in a nutshell, that is sort of the best case scenario. It doesn't always happen. There's a lot of politics. There's a lot of administrative stuff that's involved in creating a commission, whether it be temporary or permanent. That if an artist is coming into that space and is not strong in his or their conviction, then it could be lost. And something that and that's an opportunity for projects to not be successful in however you define that. So when we do a panel, when we are in the process of commissioning a work, we have something we call a selection panel. And this is the group of people that end up making the decisions. We want to make sure that these groups of people is quite balanced. There's half are from the city and from the administration that has to take care of the work or whatever. And the other half needs to be from the community, and they need to be on equal footing. They need to have, the same level of decision-making power, right? And otherwise that doesn't really work. And so I hope that answered the question, but that's in a nutshell what we think is the most effective way of getting really impactful, commemorative public art, commissioned works.
And that organizing and fundraising can take years sometimes, yeah.
We have another question from the hotline. So when do you choose a quote unquote fun human connection experience approach to public art versus a more pensive, penetrative cellular memory Bridging History to Future Approach to a Public Art Experience. Which one is more necessary at this time?
Yeah, you're the. Just kidding.
So it's thinking about like, yeah, what's more fun? What's the fun experience, and what's the more pensive experience, and what's more appropriate when?
Depends on the context. Yeah, I wouldn't make a comedy movie about all the stories out there. So I think it's the same thing. I do find, yeah, but play is okay, but not all the time.
I think I agree. I think an ideal situation is when you get to do both, like where I think that's what the Wax Monuments are trying to do. It's like trying to address histories that are important and nuanced, but then also have this engagement that can be playful and hold both moments. But I think it's often, again, framed by the call, and sort of, sometimes it's calling for something really serious. And actually, a lot of public calls are like, we do not want this to be serious. This is like a sculpture outside of the fire station, and we want it to be that. And so I think it's framed both in the call, but then our practices.
We were once commissioned to work with Lac Mégantic, who had a terrible explosion in their city center. It's a small town out of Quebec, in the Quebec province, out of Montreal. 47 people perished in one night. It was like it was really like the train would pass right by their main principal street, their main street, and exploded. And we worked a year after as they were rebuilding their downtown center. So it was a very tragic, somber time for the people of Mégantic and the people of Quebec. And the nice thing of the project is that we were able to work with them for a multitude of experiences. So we had the chance to offer a moment of reflection and commemoration, and at the same time, a moment of play. And I felt that balance was really critical because you're at the end of the day, you're also creating spaces for life. And, we had an exhibition that was commemorating the past, what happened that night, and, play spaces for the future. And it really felt vital for them. And the boardwalk, so that you would be elevated from the bruised terrain that was contaminated, which was probably the most important piece as a gathering tool for the community, because they would give them a safe space to walk together. And those walks became like, nightly rituals.
The dichotomy that we typically deal with is not so much like joy or somber. It's usually whether it should be somber or hopeful. And that comes up a lot. And we did the piece in Dallas. It was really important to get a sense of hope. So I think through our language of light and shadow, of course, where there's shadow, there's light. That duality is kind of built into that. But what?
There's a crack in everything.
Yeah, right. And even when the poem, when Mr. Siebels did the poem, he actually understood. He used to live in Dallas, so he understood the politics of Dallas being a southern city. So he did his poem, and then the activist group read the poem, and he was like, "That's not enough. You need to go farther into this." So in his poem, he kind of had these allusions to the actual violence that occurred at these lynchings. And we actually did a project where it just made me think of it with play, is that we did a memorial for an individual who had slipped and just died tragically. And she was a very much part of our community, and the piece was out in this kind of trail that she loved to. This is up near Northern California. So we created this kind of a Mobius bench where people could have a respite and enjoy the scenery, but they did not want it to be a somber expression. They wanted it to be playful and hopeful and really about nature. And she was a painter, so we made this piece out of stone, but it had a kind of a brushstroke ephemeral quality. And she loved children, so we wanted something that children could climb on and play on. So that's and then when we actually were doing that project, it made us think of the Princess Diana Memorial, where she tragically passed away, but she loved kids. So the memorial was this kind of circular fountain that children could play in. So that literally was the best way to remember, Princess Diana was through the play of children. So like you said, it really depends on the nature of the narrative that you're telling.
So we have time for one more question, and this question invites you to reflect on your practice and your process over the years. Public art involves many unknowns. Can you share more personal experiences that come to mind in relation to challenges or obstacles or unexpected things you've encountered along the way?
I mean, the big linking comes back to mind for me, where it was just constantly being surprised, and I think that is my experience of public art. Is just I try my best to anticipate what's going to happen from the community's participation, and I'm always shocked at I did not think of that, because the Lincoln, at first we had 100 wicks in the body of the Lincoln. We put it out there, and within days before we even got to unveil it, people had come and lit every wick on it. They were sending me Instagram videos of it. I don't even know how they knew it was we didn't even have signs out yet. And so it was burning for days. It was a whole disaster. The fire department was there Monday morning. The kids were upset because they didn't get to have their moment with their sculpture, and people he was headless. So then it was this. So they were we gotta cancel the project. We gotta remove the Lincoln. It took all of this work to recast it, and I had to sign a contract with the city that the second version would only have 10 wicks, none in the face, none in the chest. And even still then, so it was there for months, and then somebody stole the hand, and then somebody stole a leg off of it. And it was that leg was hundreds of pounds of wax. And then a week later, the leg was back. And then I was it must have been, maybe some kids took it together and hid it under their bed, and then a parent found it and told them to put it, I don't know. I have no idea. And that all happened before then it melted and became this whole news story. I forget even what the question was, but I was surprised.
Surprise.
Yeah.
I don't think I can beat that. You make me think of when we were installing in the middle of a protest weeks in Montreal, the student protests. And we were it was the early days of the studio, and we were building a giant staircase in wood. And at night we'd watch videos of garbage cans on fire. and we panicked one night, and we hired someone, a guard of un gardien, a guard to sleep by the staircase just for one night. And the second night we were fine. It was okay. The staircase made it, and it made it the whole summer. But we were so scared that they were, it was also varnished with oil varnish, and I think that's what was really, I don't know, keeping us up at night. But yeah.
There was a project, one of my very first projects I worked on many years ago was for a school in an area in Manhattan, New York City, called Washington Heights, which was primarily Hispanic folks, and commissioned a work of art by an artist who wanted to reference the equestrian sculptures. So he created this 12-foot chair and a horse on it. And the idea was for the kids to envision themselves being, on the horse. And, and it was a red chair, and it was a pinto horse, a very innocuous horse. It wasn't one of those rough and tumble horses. But very proud, completed this project, and took years, and we installed it, and we started getting calls from the community. They want this removed immediately. And so what happened? And nobody would tell you. So they organized a community board meeting. And if you've ever been to a community board meeting, when there's something wrong, everybody shows up, right? And so for about 3 hours, one after the other, somebody's complaining about something about the sculpture. And one person would say, red is a violent color. There's a lot of violence in this community and all that. And so some of the things people were saying didn't really make sense to, to have a big effect on the project until at the end of the meeting. And as we were leaving, a gentleman came and said, listen, I got to actually tell you what's really wrong with this. For 12 years, we've been trying to get a school built for our community. And it was not built because there is a college across the street, and the dean has prevented it from happening because he said, I don't want a school to these kids because these kids are animals. And so we commissioned a work of art of an animal on a school chair. And so there was a lot of shame from the community you have been represented. And then there's this sort of monument of that very same saying that we didn't know anything about. So as a result of that, it completely changed how we work with community. We didn't expect them to come to us. We expected to go to them and create spaces where they were able to freely express themselves in their own space, in their own time, in their community, with their stakeholders to sort of let us know these kinds of things prior to it happening. So that was quite a surprise. And so now, of course, the piece was removed immediately, and it traveled around, and you could see it now in front of the Denver's Children's Museum in Denver, Colorado. And so that's the story behind that piece. If you've ever been to Denver, Children's Museum, you see the horse in the chair, that's why it's there. So
I think for us, it's a fairly recent challenge. I think it's who's telling the story. And by who is usually, if we're the lead artist, like we're telling the story, but how we work, as you know, we work collaboratively with community and other artists and historians and poets. And in the beginning, that was less of an issue. So when a lot of our projects deal with kind of multiracial stories, whether it's African American history or Native American history, Holocaust, those types of things, and like, well, what is your experience with that subject? Why are you telling that story? And then when you're having a panel and you have multiple artists and you have artists that kind of demographically match that story versus us, it gets interesting. And we've been assured, oftentimes they'll come to us and we don't, we're not inquiring, but they said, look, the fact that you're a multiracial team as opposed to a team that's all Black, all Hispanic, it doesn't matter. We just want the best work. But the subconscious, and this, when you're selecting art, subconscious biases go in. So there may be some of that. We've run into that, even though our team is multiracial, and we do our due diligence to kind of be the conduit, as we say. But oftentimes that doesn't do any good because the optics are pretty apparent, especially if you're not that familiar with the process of how it got built. And and I use a lot of film analogies because I think there's a lot of similarities between public art. It involves all these people to create something over years. That's kind of filmmaking's the same way. And when Steven Spielberg did The Color Purple, people question that. Why isn't Spike Lee doing that? So there's the issue of like who's telling it, whose voice is it? And that's become our biggest challenge, because when we're going into a project, they can assure you that like it's the work that counts, but we don't know. And often they're not going to tell you that too, because even if that, like you said, like the guy brought you aside and said, well, this is what the case is. We don't have that luxury. We don't have anybody that will tell us the truth or transparent with us. So we often will. I think MLK is a different one, because I think MLK is like a public domain figure of American history, so we feel a little bit more comfortable. But a lot of works, like the Shirley Chisholm project is a little bit more specific, a lesser known African American pioneer. So, who tells that story, kind of like, we've applied to Asian American projects, hasn't been selected for a shortlist of any one of those. So yeah, I think that for us has been, I think, kind of looking around the corner, is something that we don't want to be a part of a project if we're not, if we're not the team that feels like we're a good match in terms of the community's eyes. So we don't want to enter that space if we're not welcome to it. So we're often trying to be a little bit very careful, do our due diligence about, is this, we don't want to put ourselves there if we're just, it's not going to work out.
So I think we are at time. So I just want to thank everybody for coming and spending time with us this evening, and especially thank you to all of our speakers. So I know we didn't get to everybody's questions, but maybe our speakers and the folks from Reimagine Columbus will kind of stick around for a little bit more conversation, another 15 minutes or so. But thank you all for coming, and hopefully we'll see you back here at other events. Thank you.